What if the royal fairy tale the world fell in love with wasn't really a fairy tale at all? What if behind the perfectly staged photos, the emotional interviews, and the inspirational speeches about compassion and kindness, there was a trail of awkward timelines, leaked emails, disappearing friendships, and business deals that quietly collapsed behind the scenes? Because every time Meghan Markle appeared in public presenting the polished version of her story, another strange detail seemed to slip out somewhere else. A report here, a leaked message there, a former friend suddenly speaking up years later. And slowly, piece by piece, a very different version of the story started forming. Not rumors, not internet conspiracies, but moments, documents, and incidents that critics say reveal something far more complicated about the Duchess's rise from Hollywood actress to royal headline machine. And the deeper you dig into the timeline, the messier it starts to look.
The wicked bitch of Montecito strikes again.
Meghan Markle are once again under fire.
Harry and Meghan, the dreariest couple in the history of planet Earth.
The BS from Meghan just never seems to stop.
They've made their bed for the last 6 years, and now they're sleeping on them, and the entire world knows exactly what's happening with those two.
I want to tell you a story. When I was just 11 years old, this commercial, women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans. It just wasn't right, and something needed to be done.
It sucks. Are you joking? It's bad. It's terrible. It's stupid.
No way. Because she also, again, she can't talk to anybody. She can't. It's all so stilted.
And everything has to be perfect.
Meghan Markle has been in control this entire time, and she's fumble after fumble after fumble.
Like, that is just abundantly clear. Nothing has worked. Everything has failed. A failure of their relationship, a failure of their plans, a failure of basically every aspect of their life in many ways.
One failure after another for the former royal couple.
You're not fun to collaborate with. You don't know what the hell you're doing. What the heck are these wickless candles? Get out of here.
You're goddamn right.
The wickless candle still haunts me.
Imagine spending years crafting the perfect image. Global humanitarian, modern duchess, inspirational public figure, a woman redefining what royalty looks like in the 21st century. But then something strange begins happening. Former friends suddenly vanish from the narrative. Emails begin appearing in courtrooms. Royal staff quietly walk away from their jobs. Business ventures launch with enormous hype and then disappear almost as quickly as they arrived. And every time the public image gets polished again, another uncomfortable story seems to crawl out from behind the curtain. Which brings us to the first moment that made people start asking questions. Because the famous love story between Meghan Markle and Prince Harry was always presented like something straight out of a Disney script. Two strangers meet on a blind date, instant chemistry, a whirlwind romance, a prince falling head over heels for an American actress. But critics noticed one tiny detail that made the fairy tale timeline slightly awkward. At the exact moment Meghan reportedly met Harry, she was still publicly linked to Canadian celebrity chef Corey Vitiello. For years, she had been living in Toronto while filming Suits, and Vitiello was widely known as her boyfriend in that social circle. Photos together, public appearances, friends who openly referred to them as a couple, which suddenly made the royal love story timeline feel a little messy. Because according to people inside that same social scene, the two relationships may not have happened in neat separate chapters. They overlapped.
Before Meghan Markle had her prince, she had a chef, Chef Corey, who dated Meghan for 2 years while she was shooting her TV show Suits in Toronto.
Suddenly, that magical How We Met story started sounding less like destiny and more like complicated scheduling. Now, to be fair, Meghan has never publicly confirmed that there was any crossover between the relationships. But once people began placing the dates side by side, the timeline stopped looking clean. Instead, it started looking like a relationship relay race. One boyfriend quietly exiting the frame just as a prince entered the picture.
One big question, was Meghan dating Corey at the time she had that fateful blind date with Prince Harry? One published report in Britain says she was still Corey Vitiello's partner when Harry asked for her number.
And that was only the beginning, because the next controversy didn't come from gossip blogs or celebrity rumors. It came from inside Buckingham Palace itself. A leaked internal email from a senior royal aide reportedly revealed that several palace staff members had raised concerns about working conditions around Meghan. Not one isolated complaint, multiple incidents. The kind of issues that normally stay buried inside human resources sources' departments, far away from the public eye, except this time the details escaped.
Yeah, well, this has sort of been an ongoing mystery now for a few years. Of course, before Harry and Meghan sat down with Oprah Winfrey, there was these reports that came out in the press about historical allegations of bullying by Meghan Markle towards staffers when she was living at Kensington Palace. In that time, several staffers allegedly left the employment of the palace because of Meghan's behaviour.
Suddenly, a narrative started forming that clashed sharply with Meghan's carefully constructed public persona, because publicly she spoke constantly about kindness, empathy, and mental health awareness. But according to those internal complaints, some staff allegedly experienced something very different behind the scenes.
That this was somehow sort of suppressed and tucked under the carpet to avoid any embarrassment for a senior royal.
What's interesting is neither side is denying the existence of this bullying complaint, and therefore you have to assume that it is true. And as you say, that's very serious indeed. We've got a bullying complaint that's been handed to the head of HR in the royal household about someone who was, at the time at least, a very senior member of the royal family. Meghan was married to the sixth in line to the throne, and this is very serious indeed.
Which created a pretty uncomfortable contradiction, because preaching kindness is easy. Actually practicing it inside a workplace full of exhausted assistants, press teams, and royal aides, that's where things reportedly became complicated. But the drama didn't stay inside palace walls. Soon it moved online. Anyone following the endless debates surrounding Meghan and Prince Harry began noticing something unusual happening across social media. A group of fiercely loyal accounts calling themselves the Sussex Squad appeared almost everywhere, defending Meghan with relentless intensity. Critics would publish negative stories, and suddenly thousands of accounts would appear in the replies. Journalists would ask uncomfortable questions, and waves of aggressive messages would follow. Officially, these were simply passionate fans, supporters defending a duchess they admired. But over time, critics started asking a different question. Was this really just an organic fan base, or had something else quietly formed? A digital shield protecting Meghan's public image from criticism? Because when thousands of accounts appear the exact moment negative headlines surface, that stops looking like coincidence. It starts looking like coordinated damage control. And while that online war was exploding, another strange chapter was unfolding in California. Because after leaving royal duties and relocating to Montecito, Meghan launched what looked like her big return to lifestyle branding. A glossy new venture called American Riviera Orchard. Beautiful photography, elegant jars of jam, carefully curated Instagram aesthetics. The Duchess reinventing herself as a lifestyle entrepreneur, a Montecito version of Martha Stewart. At least that was the marketing. But behind the polished images, reports began suggesting something very different. According to insiders familiar with the launch, the brand struggled almost immediately. Questions started circulating about unpaid staff, legal issues with former employees, and confusion about whether a full business operation even existed behind the glamorous branding. Then came the moment that raised the most eyebrows: the famous jam release. A limited batch of jars that instantly sold out. On paper, that sounded like a massive success. But critics noticed something strange. The quantities were reportedly so tiny that selling out didn't necessarily mean huge demand. It meant there were barely any jars in the first place. Some insiders even mocked the situation, claiming the products were mostly sent to friends and influencers, which turned what was supposed to be a triumphant brand launch into an internet punchline, a lifestyle empire that appeared to sell out instantly because there were almost no products available to begin with. And just when people thought the story couldn't get stranger, another uncomfortable anecdote from Meghan's pre-royal life began circulating through British media circles. Back when she was still navigating the UK entertainment scene, she reportedly developed connections with several personalities in London media. One of them was television figure Lizzie Cundy. According to Cundy, Meghan once asked her for help finding something very specific, not just a boyfriend, a famous British man to date, not personality first, not romance first, status first. which suddenly made the later love story with Prince Harry look a little more strategic to some critics. Of course, introductions happen all the time in entertainment circles. Friends set people up constantly, but asking someone to locate a famous British boyfriend sounded less like romance and more like networking with a dating profile. And the deeper people looked into Meghan Markle's past connections, the more stories like that seemed to surface. Stories about friendships fading, contacts disappearing, and people who once claimed to be close to her suddenly becoming strangers the moment her life moved to to a higher social level, which led critics to ask a blunt question. Was Meghan Markle simply ambitious, or was she playing a much longer game all along? Because by the time she stepped onto the global stage as a royal bride, the carefully crafted image was already beginning to crack, and the next scandal would take that image straight into one of the most sensitive territories imaginable: the royal family's rules about money. And just when people thought the early controversies surrounding Meghan Markle were already dramatic enough, the next allegation pushed things into territory that made palace officials deeply uncomfortable, because it involved something the British royal family has always treated as sacred: royal children. For generations, royal babies have been introduced to the public through carefully staged photo calls outside hospitals or palace gates. The moment is symbolic, tradition, a shared national event. But according to reports circulating inside royal circles at the time, something very different was allegedly proposed when Meghan was pregnant with her first child with Prince Harry. Instead of the traditional royal introduction, there were whispers that her team had floated the possibility of selling exclusive baby photos of Prince Archie to the press, not releasing them, selling them. In Hollywood, that idea is completely normal. Celebrity couples sell baby photos to magazines all the time for millions of dollars. But Buckingham Palace isn't Hollywood. Royal children are not supposed to be magazine exclusives. They're not product launches, and they definitely don't come with price tags, which is why, according to reports, the moment palace officials heard about the idea, it was shut down immediately. But the fact that the conversation reportedly happened at all left many inside the palace uneasy, because once royal moments start becoming business opportunities, the next question becomes unavoidable. If the first baby photo almost became a payday, what else might eventually be for sale? And that wasn't the only uncomfortable situation happening behind palace doors, because while the public saw glamorous appearances, speeches about compassion, and carefully staged charity events, a completely different narrative was quietly forming among some staff members working inside the Sussex household. Several employees reportedly left their roles within a relatively short period of time, and according to multiple reports, some of those departing employees allegedly had to sign strict non-disclosure agreements before leaving. NDAs themselves aren't unusual. High-profile workplaces use them constantly. But what raised eyebrows were reports that some staff were allegedly offered financial incentives to remain silent about their experiences. The most explosive moment came when a former communications secretary sent an internal message expressing concern that Meghan had allegedly forced two personal assistants out of their roles. Suddenly, the public narrative about compassion and empathy was colliding with a completely different description coming from inside the workplace. A description involving stress, tension, and staff departures that critics described as unusually frequent. And while that storm brewed inside palace offices, another one was forming thousands of miles away in Hollywood. Technically, the connection is so remote that it has no real significance, separated by centuries. But the irony was impossible to ignore. The Martin fairy tale of two completely different worlds colliding turned out to also be a very distant family reunion. But the biggest business scandal came from the media deal that was supposed to transform Meghan into a global podcast powerhouse. In 2020, Meghan and Prince Harry signed a massive deal with Spotify, reportedly worth tens of millions of dollars. The plan was ambitious: a podcast called Archetypes, exploring stereotypes and social issues facing women. The Duchess as a thoughtful interviewer, a new intellectual voice in global media. At least that was the pitch. But once the deal was signed, production moved painfully slowly. Months passed with little content, then more months. Eventually, a small batch of episodes appeared, but far fewer than expected for a contract reportedly worth millions. And then came the moment that stunned the entertainment industry. Spotify ended the partnership. After years of hype, the massive deal collapsed with only a handful of episodes produced, which triggered a wave of criticism from inside the industry. One Spotify executive even publicly described the couple as grifters, corporate language that basically translates to one brutal message: we paid a lot of money and didn't get much in return. For a media deal once expected to launch a podcast empire, the outcome looked less like a triumph and more like a very expensive microphone that barely got turned on. But the next controversy struck an emotional nerve with a completely different audience: animal lovers. For years, Meghan had built an image around compassion, rescue animals, and humanitarian values. Her dogs often appeared in interviews and magazine features. She even described one of them as her baby. Or the friendships that vanished the moment royalty entered the picture, because if history has shown anything about royal drama, it's that the next chapter is always just one headline away.